The group thread bloomed like fireworks I hadn't been invited to watch. Their photos stacked, boarding passes, matching linen, sunglasses with mirrored seas, each caption a tiny drumbeat that said "not you." I scrolled in the blue light of my studio, where empty coffee cups formed a small archipelago around my keyboard. It wasn't the absence of a ticket that hurt. It was the practiced choreography of forgetting me, the way family can tidy you out of a frame and call it organization. I heard my mother's careful voice in the captions, my father's tidy logistics in the itinerary. I heard my sister's laugh amplified by 1,000 followers. I heard myself not at all. Then an email pinged, subject line, "Stories at Sea, a cruise line brief. Looking for a human spot about belonging." The ocean pressed its palm to the window. I thought, fine. If the dock leaves without you, build your tide. They said cabins were limited, like affection had a head count. "We figured you'd be busy." My mother texted, that soft rug she uses to sweep. "Hurt under." My father followed with a spreadsheet screenshot. Waitlist logic, excursion slots, a little algorithm for erasing a daughter. Layla sent a heart. Then a link to her latest video, Packing Hacks for Island Hopping, where I could see our parents reflected in her sunglasses. 2 neat parentheses, holding a sentence I wasn't in. I typed and deleted twice. What I wanted to say was not about a ticket. It was about the hallway of birthdays I'd filmed, the edits I'd rushed to make their anniversaries sparkle, the way I'd bent light for them and learned to flick it off for me. Instead, I saved my breath like matches and opened a new document. Vo. When the dock leaves without you, the brief wanted authentic connection at sea. The words were a raft if I didn't turn them into a weapon. I called Eli and paced the hall while the AC rattled like faraway surf. We would cast people who'd missed flights and funerals and still found a way to arrive for themselves. We would write a voiceover that didn't beg, didn't accuse, just name the ache and the tide that answers it. The trick with pain on camera is not to glamorize the bruise. The trick is to hold a lamp to the room and let the room confess. I promised myself. No subtweets, no family names, no revenge. Masquerading as art. Only art that lets me stand where I wasn't allowed and say, I am here. Somewhere between those sentences, the ocean inside me changed from undertow to metronome. I could hear my mother saying, "Beta, don't make a scene." And I wanted to tell her scenes are what I do. But restraint is also a craft. Eli pushed me there. Aim for witness, not wound. We sketched a spot that begins with a missed goodbye, widens to strangers who ferry each other across small distances, and ends with a simple sentence. However you arrive, we'll meet you at the rail. My voice would read it, my face would not appear. The contract addendum was the quiet lever. In-ship distribution across signage, cabins, deck screens, fleet-wide rollout, day 2 at 7. It felt like standing beside a tide gate with a hand on the wheel, asked to open it slowly. I thought of Dad's hands braiding mine when I was 8. The sea remembers who we are, even when family forgets. I didn't tell anyone. Secrets aren't healthy, but sometimes privacy is an oxygen mask. I booked a caregiver upgrade for Dottie's cabin through a favor in logistics, a gift with no return address. I recorded the voiceover at dawn, when my throat still remembered dreams, and said the lines like I was telling them to the child who waited at airports. The mix landed somewhere between lullaby and anthem. When the last reverb tail settled, I closed my eyes and pictured their ship cutting a clean wake, a knife that doesn't know it is a knife. I pictured my little film arriving like a tide that lifts even unkind boats. Then I sent final delivery to the network and made tea. The cup warmed my hands. Somewhere out there, screens were waiting, and for once, I didn't feel like one of them had to be me. Morning came with the thrum of freight elevators and the smell of over-roasted coffee from the hallway cafe. I drafted a first pass of the spot, reading the lines under my breath until they detached from my mouth and floated like kites. Eli listened with the patience of somebody arranging wings on a creature that hasn't decided to fly. "Cut the apology," he said, and the room brightened a notch. We replaced adjectives with images, guilt with gravity. I wanted the ocean to be more than scenery. I wanted it to behave like a witness that never forgets. We mapped a day-by-day plan. Casting Tuesday, locations Wednesday, Vopolish Thursday, legal Friday. Between bullet points, I felt a pulse. Steady title. Not righteous anger, not even hurt exactly. Something older, like a drum under the floorboards saying, "Walk." We pinned the schedule and left space for grace, a blank square labeled simply Tide. Casting never feels like assembling faces. It feels like listening for frequencies. We rented a modest room with good windows and asked people what they'd missed and how they arrived anyway. A nurse who missed Diwali, but FaceTime through fireworks. A saxophonist who ferried his own horn across town after the car died. A widower who learned to cook for one. Their stories braided into a rope thick enough to pull a ship. I watched for the alchemy when a person's truth meets a camera and refuses to flinch. No beauty pageant, no polished grief. Just the precise timbre of a life turned slightly toward the light. Between sessions, I texted Dowdy a sun emoji, and she returned a little boat. I didn't know if she understood details, only that she felt the current. By evening, our board was full, and the room hummed like a harbor at dusk. Locations were a scavenger hunt for honest light. We chose a pier at Blue Hour, a city bus window for moving reflection, a stairwell that pooled shadow like memory, and a pool deck we'd dress to suggest, not replicate, a ship. It doesn't have to be literal to be true, Eli reminded me, and something inside unclenched. I negotiated permits with a smile I keep for bureaucrats, and a voice I keep for art. The ocean, even off-screen, was an actor we needed to respect. We timed our schedule against tides and traffic, found a cafe willing to shut lights for a 30-second dusk hold, and rented a rain machine we hoped not to use. I tucked Dadi's photo into my pocket like a compass. Each place we circled on the map felt like a syllable. Together they would say, simply, "We find each other." Wardrobe and props were a hymn to lived-in truth. No pristine cruise whites, just the clothes people actually carry to their second chances. We laid them on a long table. Frayed cuffs, sun-soft cotton, a blazer, shiny at the elbows. I recorded tempo to see how fabric moved with voice. The line, "However you arrive, we'll meet you at the rail," landed like an oath instead of an invitation. Legal sent back notes in the language of risk, and we trimmed needles without stealing thread. By midnight, we had a call sheet that read like a poem. Dawn pier, bus window, stairwell dusk, rooftop night. I slept for an hour with the script under my cheek like a childhood book. When I woke, I knew which shots would carry my mother's carefulness, my father's neatness, my sister's glitter. I would honor them by telling the truth that didn't accuse, only illuminated. Shoot day cracked open like an egg over hot pavement. Crew call at 5:00 a.m. Sky the color of unripe plums. The nurse told her story without tears. The bus threw our reflections back at us. The widower paused on the stair and inhaled as if the building had an ocean tucked inside it. I kept my face outside the frame and my voice inside the room, guiding cadence, guarding dignity. When the pier turned blue and the gulls quieted, we captured the final line against a horizon that didn't promise anything, and therefore could not lie. I listened to the takes in headphones and felt the floor under me steady, not because anyone had apologized, but because the work did what work is meant to do. Turn ache into architecture. We wrapped on time. The crew clapped. I sent a silent thank you to the tide and to the blank square we had left for it. Embarkation day rose like a billboard I couldn't ignore. Layla's deck intro with a horn blast stitched under it, our parents in soft focus behind her. Marco counting lanyards with the zeal of a quartermaster. I let the sounds through my phone's speakers for exactly 10 seconds, then shut them off and let the quiet reassert its shape. The final mix waited like a patient tide. I pulled the oboe a hair forward, tucked the saxophonist's breath just under the line about strangers ferrying each other. In the gap where rage used to live, there was room for crap. I measured the distance between ache and clarity in decibels and frames, a ruler only I could read. Outside the studio, Miami glittered in noon heat. In my headphones, the ocean settled to a body tempo. I wasn't making a weapon, I was making a window, and I decided who could look through it first. Eli arrived with silence. I trusted more than any pep talk. We played the spot full length, then again without picture, then picture without sound, stripping and restoring until only the necessary remained. He tapped the legal addendum with the side of a pen, that clause about in-cabin channels and public atrium displays, and our eyes met over the simplest math I've ever done. If the work is true, let it be seen. No faces of us, I said, and he nodded, already scrubbing to the fairy shot that felt like a confession. I printed a 2-release and a broadcast-safe version, uploading both to the fleet portal, my cursor hovering over the checkbox labeled, All Ships, Day 2, 19-0. I thought of Dada's boat emoji last night, 2 pixels that felt like a benediction. I clicked expecting thunder. What came was quieter. The sound of promises aligning. The confirmation email hit with the bland triumph of corporate language. A set received, scheduled per spec. And still, my chest loosened. Distribution mapped across time zones, a choreography of screens, waking like islands at dusk. Somewhere between Nassau and open water, a cruise director would glance at a grid and see my title in a neat box. I pictured her weighing game shows against small human miracles and giving us 6 minutes of quiet. I sent a thank you with the professionalism I keep polished like silver, then closed my eyes and listened one more time. The nurse's line didn't tremble. The widower's pause contained an ocean. This was not a subtweet. It was a lifeline. In the corner, my phone blinked with a new upload from Layla. Sail away with us. The U's carrying its usual weight. I let it pass like a ship seen from shore. Bright, loud, and not mine. By sunset, they were under a sky the color of pressed hibiscus, and I could tell from the reflection on Layla's sunglasses they'd claimed a spot near the rail. I let myself watch without entering, like standing at the edge of a neighbor's party. Our parents looked younger aboard a floating promise. Marco narrated in his neat voice. Daddy waved at a child with the authority only grandmothers command. None of this was a sin. It was life, arranged without me. My laptop chimed. QQC from the network. No interstitial ads. Closed captions burned in. Levels best. I scrubbed each line against the safety bars and imagined hearing it bleed into their evening, like a tide under music. I wanted the moment to wrap the ship in listening more than shock. I wanted them, if they recognized my voice, to be held by it, not dragged. The ocean knows the difference. The last hour before a thing exists is always the longest. I walked the perimeter of my studio like a captain testing the deck, then sat and wrote the single public sentence I would share tomorrow. A thank you to the collaborators, a note about belonging, an invitation to those who felt erased to take up space with me. No subtexts, no darts tucked into the folds. I scheduled it, then set my phone face down and listened. The city below exhaled. The AC hiccuped. Traffic made a river sound. I thought of 8-year-old me at an airport, clutching a boarding pass I couldn't yet read. I thought of 82-year-old Daddy teaching me that the sea is a memory with a pulse. When the portal pinged with asset locked for playback, something unclenched in my chest. The ship would carry my voice whether I watched or not. I turned off the lights. The tide was set. Sea day unspooled like ribbon under a blade. By late afternoon, the ship had a festival heartbeat. Steel drums, bingo calls, the wind's low sermon at the rail. Somewhere inside that floating city sat a schedule box with my 6 quiet minutes. I pictured cables tucked in walls like pillories, all of them leading to screens that had spent the day selling raffles and karaoke glory. At 1857, the sun leaned toward bronze and conversations thinned into silhouettes. I didn't press play. I had already chosen not to be witness and architect at once. Still, I could feel the hour turning, the way tide announces itself without apology. I thought about the physics of attention, how it hushes groups like snowfall. And I prayed the hush would be kind. Not a gotcha, not a spectacle. Just a door opened in the middle of a party, and a breeze that smelled like the truth. At 19:0, silence found them before the audio did. The collective inhale audiences take when they sense ceremony. The first frame was a pier in blue hour. The nurse's hands opening like a harbor. My voice followed, steady and unadorned, braided through the ship's arteries and out into atriums, bars, cabins, stairwells. Screens bloomed in synchrony. The promenades led columns, the elevator panels, the cinema that had been looping cartoons for restless children. People softened at the edges. Plastic cups paused midair. The ocean, ever the show-off, held perfectly still as if to listen. Somewhere on that deck, my family's laughter stalled on a syllable. I had rehearsed not gloating, and it turned out gloating wasn't even invited. The moment was larger than my grievance. It was 6 minutes of witnesses remembering they were human before they were hungry, tipsy, busy. The ship itself seemed to exhale and make room. In the atrium, the sound gathered like a choir at first rehearsal. Hesitant, then unanimous. The widower's pause landed with a weight that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the way loss edits a life. A bartender stopped shaking a tin. A concierge turned down a radio. On a mezzanine, Layla's camera hung at her hip. Red tally light off for once. I imagined her scene, not a sister's stunt, but a story with its own spine. My parents have always been good at hosting, at placing napkins between people and their discomfort. But there is no napkin big enough to cover a voice that says, gently, I am here. Daddy, who can smell sincerity like cardamom, would recognize me before the second sentence. Not because of vanity, because grandmothers are tuned to the frequency of grandchildren they've braided prayers into. The ship listened. The ship, traitor and ally, carried it. Cabins softened too. Behind hundreds of doors, strangers watched their own small exclusions mirrored, and the ship turned into a confessional with carpeting. In my parents' room, I pictured the itinerary, neatly ironed, slipping a line as the captions read, "However you arrive, we'll meet you at the rail." My father is not cruel. He is efficient. My mother is not cold. She is careful. Efficiency and care can do harm when they become shields. In Layla's cabin, maybe the ring light waited patiently. A pet trained to perform. Maybe she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself be a daughter before a host. Daddy would have the volume a notch too loud, the way elders insist on hearing truth without strain. I wasn't there to curate their faces. That was the mercy and the cost. The film ended the way tides do, without applause, only the fact of water returning. When the final chord dissolved, there was a hush as consequential as any ovation. Somewhere, a child clapped once, and then stopped, as if warned by the air to treat the quiet tenderly. Margot made a brief announcement. "Thank you to the storytellers. Then let the ship keep listening." Layla, I'm told, did not film the credits. My parents didn't speak first. Daddy wiped her eyes with the end of her shawl and smiled at no one, or maybe at me, traveling through wires. I don't know what they said to each other, what inventory of small justifications they took or set down. I know only that the 6 minutes we bought were fair, not cruel. I closed my eyes in my dark studio and let their sea travel through me too. The tide had gone out and returned. The shoreline redrawn by inches, enough for footsteps to choose a different path when morning came. Night gathered itself into a soft bowl, and inside it the ship kept thinking. Clips began their small migrations. Passengers filming screens, captions added in shaky text. A chorus of strangers saying they felt seen. I watched none of it in real time, but the analytics tiled across my phone like low tide revealing shells. Eli texted a single lighthouse emoji, and then nothing, which is to say, proud, present, not prime. I brewed tea. I did not drink and rehearsed sleeping. The family thread, dormant since embarkation, popped up with 3 dots that practiced restraint, then vanished. I felt oddly tender toward all of us. Toward the boy I imagined clapping once. Toward Marco's silence. Toward the part of my parents that wants celebration to be a solvent. I thought of the spot as a harbor light, not accusing ships that missed it, simply being where it had promised to be. Every night, without fail. Cruise director Margot introduced the evening show with a tone reserved for sunrises and weddings. Precise, unhurried, sincere. She thanked the Stories at Sea filmmakers for reminding the ship it had a heart. Applause scattered like coins, and then grew into something sustained. Somewhere in the middle deck, Layla kept her camera down. I heard that later, the way news returns as tide lines. Not from gossips, but from people who know the weight of choosing not to film. My parents, I imagined, threaded silence through their fingers like prayer beads. I didn't mistake applause for absolution. I let it be what it was. Strangers recognizing themselves in other strangers, which is a kind of sacred. Back in my studio, I recorded a short answer to an interview request, 2 sentences about dignity traveling farther than spectacle, and closed the tab before a comment section could explain me to myself. By morning, Layla's comments pivoted from confetti to questions. Where is your sister? Why did she narrate the ship? The algorithm loves accountability when it sparkles. I didn't want my sister tried in a court of thirst. She posted a story with no filters and said only, listening. It was the bravest thing I'd seen her do online. The family chat woke like a startled animal. My father enumerating logistics that had seemed sensible on land. My mother cushioning explanations until they were pillows that smothered oxygen. Marco typing and deleting. Daddy dropping a single boat emoji as if to say keep rowing. I typed, I'm not angry. I'm drawing a boundary with light. Then I set the phone down and let the heat drain from me like fever. Outside, Miami's day broke clean. Inside, the work kept feeling like architecture I could live in. Even if the neighborhood complained, I wrote my public statement with the care of someone folding a fragile letter. Thank you to the cast and crew, I began. If you've ever felt left at the dock, there is a rail waiting for you somewhere. No names, no winks, no subtweets. Eli approved with a thumbs up and a link to a small nonprofit that funds travel for caregivers. I added it without fanfare. When I hit post, I felt the odd lightness that follows telling the truth at a human volume. The responses were not the fireworks of virality, more like porch lights flicking on across a neighborhood. Modest, bright, reliable. The family thread quieted into a punctuationless lull. Then, unexpectedly, my mother sent a voice note. Beta we watched. She didn't say sorry. She didn't have to. Not yet. The shape of her voice had changed. It sounded like someone taking their shoes off before stepping into a room they respect. Evening returned with that specific blue that tastes like rain. I walked the long block to the bay and let the skyline be a lesson in patience. Towers built by hands I'd never meet. Floors upon floors of small domestic shapes. The ship was somewhere past the horizon, carrying my voice further than my feet had asked it to go. The family thread stopped buzzing, which felt like mercy. The work would continue to live without me pushing it. That's how you know it's work, and not a wound. I sat on a bench and watched a gull bully a pelican and laughed out loud. which startled me into remembering joy isn't a betrayal of grief. When I finally looked at my phone, there was a new message from Layla. "Can we talk at Cozumel? Off camera?" I typed yes. Not as a capitulation, as a tide. Some doors open only after the ship learns how to listen. Cozumel woke like a bell. Sun on limestone, scooters threading alleys, the harbor water an impossible mint. I landed with a producer's tote and a heart braided into practical knots. The shore excursion vendor's office overlooked the ferry pier. I rehearsed notes about liability waivers and headset radios, because it's easier to start with nouns than with names. Then the ship ghosted in, a hotel wearing a crown, and the gangways unfurled like careful tongues. I had not planned a collision, but I had cleared the runway if one appeared. A meeting scheduled 2 blocks from the port, a window wide enough for happenstance. When I stepped into the sun, the air smelled like salt and cut mango. Texts stacked. "ILS anchor, emoji. A gentle. We're docked from Marco. A boat from Daddy." I could have hidden in the architecture of work. Instead, I walked toward the rail, where family becomes a verb or a verdict. I met the vendor first, because character is how you keep promises to strangers. We walked the route, tested radios, approved shaded cues. Words like dispatch, muster, contingency steadied my hands, but the horizon kept curving me back to faces I knew better than my reflection. When we returned to the pier, they were there. My mother smoothing air, my father measuring it, my sister radiating a gentleness that cameras rarely got. Marco a quiet metronome, Daddy a lighthouse, disguised as a woman. We stood in a loose circle and remembered how to be a family, and forgot how at once. I exhaled and aimed at witness, not wound. "I'm here for work," I said. "And if you want to talk, I'm here for that too." No one lunged for apology like a life ring. We let the water hold us for a breath. Then Daddy said, "Come the tea," and the knot in the day loosened by a finger's width. Layla spoke first, which was both predictable and new. "I didn't post last night," she said, as if relinquishing a weapon. I listened. The word did what words can do when they are admission, and not performance. My father cleared his throat and offered an itinerary like a white flag. Waitlists, miscounts, the way scarcity squeezes mercy out of planners. My mother's voice arrived, wrapped in hospitality, then stripped itself bare. "We thought we were protecting you from busyness and ourselves from something," I said, the only truth I trusted. I needed to be the one to invite myself. I told them the spot wasn't revenge. It was a door. I watched the door open in their faces, not wide, but enough to see another room lit inside. We stood in that threshold, awkward and alive. Daddy hummed a tune she used to braid into my hair, and the pier's heat softened us into people instead of positions. I kept the sharpest truth for the middle, where it could hold without cutting. "Daddy," I said, "I arranged a caregiver upgrade for your cabin. No invoice will come. It's a gift from my producer fee." She laughed, delighted, scolding, because dignity is funny when it surprises you. My parents blinked, knocked off balance by generosity that didn't demand interest. "You shouldn't have," my mother said, which in our language means, "We're grateful and we don't know how to hold it yet." My father folded the map very carefully and slid it into his pocket, buying time. Layla reached for my hand like a person reaching for light after a tunnel. No one declared absolution. We let goodness sit between us like cold water in a hot room. I named my boundary plainly. I won't be the unseen camera anymore. If I'm in the story, I choose my frame. The sea slapped the pilings like a drum that agreed. We didn't solve a family in an afternoon. We marked it with chalk and promised not to hose it away. My father said he wanted to learn how to invite without controlling the RSVP. My mother put her hand on my cheek and didn't say sorry. Her thumb did. Layla asked to interview me someday, And I said yes if the question isn't content but care. Marco apologized for the convenience of his silence. I told him convenience is a current you can swim against if you want. Daddy pressed a prayer into my palm, tiny and folded like a sail. The vendor coughed nearby, reminding me that work, like the sea, keeps its own clock. We set a small plan. Dinner in port. No cameras, no agenda, just the experiment of being together. As they turned toward the avenue, I stayed a moment longer and looked at the ship. It didn't seem like a knife anymore. It looked like a ferry. Dinner in town was the kind of ordinary that feels like a ceremony, when a family has forgotten how to set a table for all its ghosts. We chose a place with wobbling fans and paper placemats that curl at the corners. No one reached for a camera, and the relief was a low tide in the room. We talked about nothing first. The mango, the band, the way scooters sound like bees, and then about something. How invitations can be built, like bridges, instead of gates. My father admitted he confuses efficiency with care. My mother said she uses politeness the way some people use umbrellas, good until the wind turns. Layla promised to put the lens down when the story needs hands instead. I said boundaries aren't walls. They're railings so we don't fall into old water. Daddy told a story about a ferry that only left once. Everyone was aboard. We laughed, the kind of laugh that adds a floor to a house. We walked the pier after, not holding hands, but holding pace. Daddy and I fell a few steps behind. She said the thing she saves for moments that want to become memories, that the sea is just a mirror we can go inside. She pressed that folded prayer deeper into my palm and called me stubborn, with a pride that made the word a medal. My parents didn't ask for a retroactive invitation to my work. They asked what the next version of us required. I said simple things with difficult edges. Loop me in at the start. Don't protect me with silence. Don't outsource truth to logistics. Layla asked if she could film our next tea, and I said yes if the camera comes last. We stood at the rail and let the evening decide us. It chose an agreement. Small, repeatable acts over grand gestures. We turned back to town. A ferry horn, lowing like a vow we could keep. Back aboard, gravity returned in gentler increments. The ship slept with one eye open. Somewhere, my spot rearing on a quieter loop. A heartbeat, rather than a trumpet. In the cabin, we built a new group thread with a name that refused erasure. All aboard G1. My father asked if I'd review itineraries before deposits. My mother suggested tea next week with no agenda. Layla drafted a post sheet. Didn't publish, writing until the apology turned into a practice. Marco offered to take the minutes, which made us laugh. And then he did it anyway, like a man who understands that choices are scaffolding, not captions. I set 3 alarms labeled call, visit, rest. Not a truce. Not a victory lap, something more domestic. Maintenance, the quiet engineering of belonging. I slept with the balcony door cracked. The sea, a metronome. No dream of missing the dock woke me. The tide inside me finally matched the tide outside. Miami rose out of haze like a city remembering its own outline. Disembarkation is an art of patience. Lines that practice choreography. Luggage that tells stories in scuffs. We stood together without insisting on togetherness, which felt like trust. Cruise director Margot found us to say the spot did more good than she could count in compliments. I told her it was built to make room, not noise. On the curb, my father asked if I'd join the planning call for Eat. I said yes, with the clause that the agenda includes asking me what I want. My mother pressed a container of still warm parathas into my hands from an impossible purse. Layla promised she'd bring a camera to tea and leave it in the bag. Marco offered rides as if offering punctuation. We did not make promises we couldn't keep. We made 2 we could. Call Friday, dinner next month. Someone waved. It might have been all of us at once. A week later, I kept an old promise to a younger self. Water before work. We chartered a small boat at dawn. Ellie, me, 2 friends who liked their own corners without demanding the room, and let the bay open like a book, I'd decided to read slowly. I told Eli I declined a make-good vacation invite and accepted a calendar invite labeled Decisions. He nodded like he had already mixed that note into a score. The horizon did what horizons do. Widen, then widen again. I spoke the last lines of the spot into the wind, not for an audience, but for muscle memory. It wasn't revenge that filled my lungs. It was weather, mine to report. The engine idled. Pelicans drew punctuation marks in the air. I thought of Deity's ferry, the one that doesn't leave until everyone is aboard, and realized I was already on something better. A vessel I could steer without asking permission to exist.